The Biden administration is making perhaps its staunchest condemnation yet of Israel's attacks on civilians in Gaza as Israeli forces mount attacks on the city of Rafah, where more than 1 million Palestinians have been seeking refuge.
Going into to Rafah, even to deal with these remaining battalions, especially in the absence of a plan for civilians, risks doing terrible harm to civilians and not solving the problem, a problem that both of us want to solve, which is making sure Hamas cannot again govern Gaza.
President Biden also recently decided to pause a shipment of bombs headed for Israel, all of which has come amid weeks of pro-Palestine protests on dozens of college campuses. So what is behind the administration's shift, and what might it mean moving forward? I'm joined by Gregory Aftandilian, adjunct professor at the Pardee School at Boston University, a professor at American University in Washington, D.C., and a former State Department Middle East analyst. Thomas Whalen, a Boston University professor with focuses on modern foreign policy and American politics, and Michael Astrue, former associate counsel to George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, among other things. Thank you all for being here. Tom, am I right to take what the Biden administration has said in recent days in tandem with this report that came from the State Department, which found that it is reasonable to suggest that Israel might have been inconsistent with international humanitarian law when it comes to its deployment of weapons? Is it fair to take all of this collectively as the biggest shift in tone from the U.S. since this conflict began?
I think that's fair, though not surprising, because, President Biden is losing a good part of his political base here among young voters. And he's trying to thread the needle here politically, but I don't think he's succeeding at all.
You see it as driven by political considerations, the shift in tone?
I think so. It's hard to look at it otherwise. He does not want to criticize Israel before a general election in November, but that's the position he forced himself in, given his comments and given the domestic situation right now.
Gregory Aftandilian, let me ask you the same thing. Is this the biggest shift in tone we've seen? And if so, what do you attribute it to?
Well, it is probably the biggest shift in tone vis-a-vis the Israel-Hamas war. But also, Biden has had a very difficult relationship with Netanyahu over many, many years. And many of you will recall that the judicial overhaul plan that Netanyahu's government wanted elicited Biden's criticism. And that was on an Israeli domestic issue. Mm-hmm. Now, the war, when the Hamas attacks occurred, Biden, of course, went to Israel, embraced Netanyahu, met with the families, met with the war cabinet. So there was a very tight embrace. But over the past several months, Biden has become increasingly frustrated that so many Palestinian civilians have been killed, and the Israeli government is not doing enough to protect those civilians.
Mike Astrue, do you think that the protests that we've seen on a number of college campuses, including several here in the Boston area, have played a role in pushing the Biden administration to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's fraught with danger for the president because, on the one hand, he has people from the left getting behind the more extreme elements in his party. But on the other hand, he's got a lot of independents, some Democrats, looking at the way the Ivy League has been handling the protests, tying it together with other resentments against woke culture. And I think there's a real reaction in the other direction as well. So there's no easy way out for him. I'm not sure that this is going to be a net political win for him at all.
Gregory, let me go back to you for a moment. You wrote a piece recently in which you talked, among other things, you talked about the potential domestic consequences of the war for President Biden and former President Trump. But you made the point in that piece that there's really been a sea change among Democrats generationally when it comes to views on Israel and Palestine. Can you just briefly synopsize what that sea change has been?
Well, older Democrats are still very much in support of Israel, but younger Democrats, there's been a big shift. There was a Quinnipiac poll of late 2023, which I have the statistic here. It says 69% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning voters under the age of 30 disapprove of Biden's handling of the war, the Israel-Hamas war.
It's a big number.
We see a big generational shift within the Democratic Party. And Biden, of course, this is an election year, and he's very concerned that he's going to lose that younger vote.
Tom Whalen, I want to get your take on the possible domestic fallout from this, how this could play out. Before you weigh in and offer any sort of prognostication or analysis, let's take a look at how former President Trump is framing recent developments in the Biden administration on the campaign trail.
This week he announced that he will withhold shipping weapons to Israel as they fight to eradicate Hamas terrorists in Gaza. No, it was shocking to hear it. Even while there are still American hostages being held by Hamas, Crooked Joe's action is one of the worst betrayals of an American ally in the history of our country.
So with that as a prelude, what do you see happening as the Biden administration stakes out the rhetorical territory that it is staking out right now? How do you see it affecting domestic politics moving forward, from the campaign to actions that might be taken by Congress involving foreign aid to Israel and to other places? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think from henceforward, particularly foreign and military aid to Israel is going to be a highly debated issue in Congress among Republicans and Democrats. And this is kind of a new thing, you know. Israel, or aid to Israel, has always been a bipartisan move in both parties. Now it's going to be a major issue. At the same time, you hear it from people like Lindsey Graham in the Republican Party, and even Speaker of the House, you know, Mike Johnson has hinted of it, that, you know, this is a betrayal of Israel, and that in a way Biden has betrayed the Republicans, the deal they cut on aid to Ukraine and Israel, and also to Taiwan. And who knows, given the rancorous partisan atmosphere, many Republicans I can see who are on the extreme right might be calling for Joe Biden's impeachment before the election.
Specifically over this?
Over this issue, saying that, you know, he is defying the will of Congress. This is a high crime and misdemeanor in their minds, and they want to punish him for it. And if they do or not, it's still, Biden is in a tough spot politically.
Mike Astrue, could you see that? Oh, yeah, by all means. Go ahead, Gregory.
Yeah. The atmospherics, of course, are lending itself to Republican criticism. But we have to also remember that Congress passed this huge supplemental aid package, which Biden completely supported, which was something like $14 billion in additional military aid to Israel. So it's not like Biden is abandoning Israel. It's just that he set markers saying that if you do go into Rafah in a major way, we're going to hold up offensive military weapons.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, can you tell people a little more about the weapons that he is saying he's going to hold back?
Well, he said he's going to hold back bombs. And he even said, you know, in December of last year that Israel has engaged in indiscriminate bombing. And he's also said he's going to hold back artillery shells. This is what he said to CNN just last week.
Mm-hmm. Mike Astrue, what do you think about the impeachment scenario that Tom floated a moment ago? Do you think that is realistic?
I mean, to be honest, Republicans have been calling for impeachment about many things.
Right.
And I don't think it matters very much. But I would disagree a little bit. Because I think the real threat here is not from the Republicans, it's within the Democratic Party itself. And historically, your other two guests would be right about the likely reaction. But we've slipped into a nutsy area in politics. And what I think the big risk for Biden is the convention coming up. Because you're going to have, you know, 10,000 unsupervised Democrats in one place with nothing productive for them to actually do.
Right.
And I think the likelihood that becomes a flashpoint for frustration for Democrats that support Israel, Democrats that support Hamas, and Democrats just looking for trouble, I think it's likely to be a zoo. And I think I think unless they're very, very careful, that could be the beginning of the end for President Biden. So I think it's going to play out more within the Democratic Party, and I think it's going to be unexpected and not something that we've seen before.
Mike, shades of 1968, you're saying?
A little bit like 68, but I think it's going to be more out of control. In 68, you know, you still had party bosses that could control delegations and that kind of thing. I don't think either party you have that kind of political control over your people anymore. And, people get elected and picked by people other than the old party bosses. And so if the head of the delegation says, look, cut that out, they're not going to stop. And so I think that's the big risk in the short term. So we'll know, within a couple months.
Yeah, we'll know very soon. Gregory Aftandilian.
If I add something here.
Yeah, by all means.
It's not that there are Democrats supporting Hamas. There are Democrats supporting the lessening of civilian casualties. I mean, it's 35,000 Palestinians have died, and 2/3 of which are women and children. I mean, at a certain point, one has to have empathy for the number of Palestinian civilians who are really in dire situation. So you do have a split within the party. I agree. You have some stalwarts who are going to say, we'll have to support Israel no matter what. But then you have other factions will say, we still support Israel, but we just don't want them to engage in more civilian deaths.
So clearly there are Democrats of that profile. But it is, in my opinion, it's just simply not true to say that there aren't Democrats out there really supporting Hamas. And if you look at the college campuses, that's clearly true. You look at the flag, they're flying the Hamas flags. They're parroting the rhetoric of Hamas. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And you've got an element in Congress, in the quote-unquote squad, including one of our local members of Congress, who are, in my opinion, right out there, with the wrong side.
Based on statements that I've seen from Congresswoman Presley, I think if she were here, she would push back. I think she would say she's not a Hamas supporter and that she's denounced the October 7th attack.
But certainly President Trump is going to frame it in that way.
He will frame it in that way, absolutely. Well, we've only got about 2 minutes left, but I'm interested in hearing, we've talked about potential domestic consequences. Gregory, do you expect this shift or sharpening on the part of the Biden administration to have any effect on what Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu choose to do in the coming weeks?
I actually don't, because Netanyahu has actually even said publicly, we can do things on our own. And they probably do have enough weapons already in their stock to go into Rafah. And I think Netanyahu has a domestic political consideration, because he believes that if he doesn't finish the job, quote unquote, in Rafah, his whole political legitimacy is at stake. Mm-hmm. So I think he's going to defy Biden, and he knows that Republicans in Congress will support him. So that's the calculation I think he's made already.
I'd love to have the two of you weigh in, and you'll end up getting the last word, Mike, just because you're further to my left than Tom is. So, Tom, how do you think this might affect the Israeli government's prosecution of the war?
Well, I think they're in it for a long time. It's not in the political interest of Netanyahu to wrap this up quickly. He would lose support, of the right wing of his coalition, and they would abandon him like a drop of a hat,
His government could collapse.
Right, exactly. And, Hamas is not going to retreat either. So it's in neither of the main antagonist political interest. And that's the true tragedy here.
All right, Mike.
I agree with that. He is not going to stop until he gets the hostages. And whether he gets them through a negotiated deal, which would be difficult and take a long time, or he gets them through military force, which is going to be difficult and take a long time, I think that he and a substantial number of people in Israel feel that's the only way they can go.
Okay. Michael Astrue, Tom Whalen, and Gregory Aftandilian, thank you all for being here to talk this through.
Thank you.